Your council tax bill's due this week. What happens if we don't pay? I'm Rachel, a public and social policy consultant on a mission to scrap council tax. And this week, somewhere in the region of 30 million council tax bills are being produced worth £50 billion. And each year, around 2 million households end up in court because they don't pay. There are people that will tell you that council tax is an illegal charge and that you don't have to pay. This is a conspiracy theory. It deserves its own video, so I'm going to do one immediately after this. Go and have a look at the next one. Now, council tax is technically one amount, but councils will send you an instalment plan. If you don't pay, the council will send you a reminder that gives you 7 days to pay the instalment that you missed. If you bring your first instalment up to date and later on in the year you miss another instalment, you will get a second reminder. But if you don't bring that first instalment up to date, the council will instead raise something called a final notice. And this is when all of the 12 months worth of council tax is due all at once. There's been a rather effective campaign against final notices for good reason. But I think those campaigns, Martin Lewis's campaign in particular, makes the assumption that the council thinks, well, if you can't afford one instalment, we'll just ask for the rest of it. That's not kind of the council's thinking. A final notice allows for all of the bill to be recovered using one liability order. But let's carry on our journey. So you've missed your first instalment, now the whole bill is due through a final notice and you still haven't brought the account up to date. The council then applies for a summons and liability order. Now, this is done in 2 stages, and this is where charges start to apply. And as with absolutely everything when we're looking at councils and council tax and charges, these charges are not uniform across the country. Across England, these charges vary greatly. They're as low as £40 in some areas and as high as £170 in others. With the exception of Wales, Wales does a lot of things a lot better than England, and the court summons and liability order costs are capped at £70. Still, £70 more than a lot of people have to spend, and if you can't afford your instalments, putting money on top of money, debt on top of debt, it's like using fire to try and put out fire. The whole thing is broken, but we're not here to discuss how it's broken. We're here to discuss the reality of it. Council tax liability order court probably isn't what we imagine. The council officer applies for a block of liability orders, all as one big application. Your name and your address isn't read out. Nobody goes through your particular council tax account. And it's after the liability court where things start to get a little bit more sort of interesting, and accounts can go down one of several routes. Most common route after a liability order is for your account to be sent to a debts enforcement agency or a bailiff. And sadly, as many, many people know, more charges are added at this stage. Bailiff fees come in 3 forms. One is £75 if they send you an enforcement letter. They can charge you £235 if they knock on your door and make a visit. And and it is very rare, they actually take your goods in order to sell. It's called distress. When they take your possessions away in order to sell to make up your debt, they can charge another £110. Or 7.5% of the debt if the debt is over £1,500, which most council tax is. But taking goods for council tax is rare. If your debt isn't sent to a bailiff, it's likely to go down one of a couple of other routes. One is a deduction from benefits. So council tax, along with other debts, can be deducted at source from, let's say, universal credit. And the debts that can be taken from universal credit are done so in a priority order. Council tax actually falls quite far down this priority. And so when your debt is sent to be deducted from your benefits, you will need to have paid off your other more priority debts like rent and utilities and water before you get to council tax. That debt can sit there for quite some time. Thankfully, they don't charge interest at this point. The maximum that can be deducted from your benefits is 5% of your standard allowance, which often isn't even the instalment that was due in the first place, meaning that people who have deductions from benefits for council tax are sort of forever chasing the rainbow. They're never getting to the point where they clear the debt. Another route is through an attachment or a deduction from your earnings. So there is a table of deductions and it starts at around 3%. So 3% for lower earners is the amount that the council can take from your net. So whatever you bring home is where the deduction starts. It doesn't start like before tax or pension or anything. It's the amount that you actually take home with you. But it escalates quickly. And if you take home more than £505 a week, the council can take 17% of that first £505 and 50% of everything on top of that. You have no choice. You have to pay it. It's taken from your salary. Now, bailiffs, deductions from benefits and attachments of earnings are kind of the three very standard routes. Now, if you own your property, the council can apply for a charging order, which is where they secure the debt against your house. Meaning, if your house is sold, however much money you get from the sale of that house, the council gets the debt. It doesn't stop there, because the council can actually apply for an order of sale, which forces the sale of the property in order to get the debt that they know that they're going to get once that property sells. It's rare, but it happens. Another route is bankruptcy. So the council can apply to make you bankrupt if you owe them more than £5,000 and other recovery options have been exhausted. The third serious one is committal to prison. Now, a bit like the summons and liability order cap, Wales does things differently. Scotland does as well, and you can no longer go to prison for non-payment of council tax, but in England you can. You can receive up to 3 months in prison for non-payment of council tax. It is rare, but it does happen. And it's important to note that committals to prison are not done when council tax is simply unaffordable and someone genuinely doesn't have the funds to pay. The council needs to prove something called willful refusal or culpable neglect. And that means someone's refused to pay their council tax on purpose, or they had the means, they were given the opportunity, and they still failed to do it. All of these stages are pretty standard, and it's quite common for somebody's council tax account and recovery to follow a non-standard path. You pay one instalment, you miss one instalment, you then catch up for 6 months, and then you miss another one, and it can get really, really messy. Around 2 million households a year receive a summons for their council tax, and as bills increase, council tax is becoming increasingly unaffordable. And in addition to the increased costs of council tax recovery on the households, psychological damage done through this recovery process, through the constant sort of fear that councils generate through the council tax recovery process, is having an enormous impact, not only on our mental health, but on our relationship with our councils. Councils are one of the biggest debt collectors that we have in this country. And yet we also ask them to deliver things like hardship support and to deal with vulnerable communities. So I do feel for councils, because they are asked to play two very difficult roles. And I know from my experience working with councils and doing exactly this job, that there are many, many people who are very reluctant to go to their council for help because they owe them money. Really no way to run public services. And it's an incredibly labour intensive way of collecting money to fund council services. So what can you do if you can't afford to pay? Well, there's a few checks that you can put into place. One is use a benefit calculator. But that benefit calculator will definitely be able to help, and not just for council tax, but for other financial support mechanisms too. The second is to make sure that you're getting any discounts and exemptions that you might be entitled to. So if you're the only adult living in your property, you will receive a 25% single occupancy discount. And there's a whole alphabet of discounts and exemptions that apply to council tax. I am going to do some other videos on them. The third is don't fall for conspiracy theories where people tell you that you don't have to pay. And the fourth thing you can do is contact your council. They can help you to identify any benefits that you're entitled to, and they can talk to you about your options. Now, I rarely need to convince people to hate council tax. Nobody likes paying it. And one of the reasons that council tax is as harmful as it is because of our debt collection. Now, debt collection isn't council tax's biggest problem, but along with sort of outdated bans and valuations of properties, it's the part of council tax, or one of the problems with council tax, that gets the most attention. And it's understandable to see why. Council tax debt recovery is an enormous issue. It's adding psychological damage on top of financial harm that we're doing for low-income households. Council tax is regressive, which means people with less pay more and people with more pay less. It sucks. Every which way you look at it, council tax is the worst. And I would absolutely like to see different recovery practices, but if we focus just on the symptoms of the problems with council tax, we'll never get to the point where we actually look at the systemic and industrial scale of the damage that it's doing. But that's all for another video. Today is about recovery. Now, if you don't pay your council tax, your council will pursue you. In the meantime, we definitely need better policy.